We are stoked.
I'm a terrible sore loser. I don't follow the rules.
All the bearded guys seem to lie. Yeah.
There are rumors galore.
I am so up and down on my emotions right now.
Retain salad.
Okay. Where there is smoke, there is always fire, etc., etc., etc.
You don't do it.
Been there, done that.
And we'll get into it later.
They know crap about hockey.
Come on. Well, I laugh it off.
I have no issue.
Here's the thing, though. I have nothing to do.
I'm okay with this deal.
There was no other option.
So now you have nothing.
We already blew it.
Win now, win now.
It paid off.
I will eat my pants.
Hey guys, it's Two Guys in Hockey Talk. I'm Bell the Cat, and I've got my co-host and beardless man.
Hey, it's Rev and Ev and Runners coming at you. And today we start our show right off the top. We got a fully packed show today with our guest, a former guest from last season, former play-by-play broadcaster for the Swift Current Broncos. Now the guy reps for RBC. Let's give them a go. Woo-woo. Welcome back, Shawn.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the cheap plug. Anytime.
Yeah, we got to make sure that we put in your Twitter on the bottom so people give you a follow. Make sure that if you have anything you want to share, we'd love for people to know. So feel free to post that on our page. Now, Evan, I've got my bevy, but we're going to get into some hockey stuff, but some junior stuff this time. So you lead us with the first one.
All right. Well, before we get into that, just a quick question for Shawn. Shawn, how did you get your passion for hockey?
Yeah, for me, it really started at quite a young age and just, real simple. It's passed down generation to generation. Sitting at the edge of the couch with my dad watching Hockey Night in Canada. For him, that meant cursing at the Maple Leafs on Saturday night and the Bob Bull story. And very quickly, my dad built backyard rinks from a young age. My parents both fostered that love of sports, and very quickly for me, I didn't dream of being, a star defenseman for the Oilers, the team I grew up cheering for. I dreamed of broadcasting, and you'd hear me in the backyard rink making up fake games, calling the goals, cheering the fake crowd noises. Same thing in the summer with baseball, recording games on cassettes. So that was my passion when I was a young guy, and it translated into getting a chance to do that as an adult, to the point where, I had a friend of mine from elementary school send me a message when he saw that I was broadcasting in trail for the Smoke Eaters, going, "Oh my God, that was your dream. I can't believe you're actually doing that." So that happened very fast for me. I knew what I wanted from a very young age.
And for our young listeners out there, a cassette is something that is before your time. Maybe it was called an MP3 now, but back in our day, when we were young, and my co-host Evan is way older, like dinosaurs grown when he was around. But yeah, that's how we used to get media around, and we were chatting a little bit earlier about that. But
I mean,
you're coming out to the show. Go ahead.
First telephone Alexander Graham Bell made to Evan. So.
Yeah. That's how he gets around. He still uses the can and the string, right? Yeah. That's how good he is. So the World Juniors are coming up in Edmonton. I know there was a little bit of postponement, but a lot of the teams are in Edmonton now, starting to play. What are your kind of initial thoughts on the tournament going on? And with some of the initial thoughts you have with all the teams, whether there could be an upset team, any team that's standing out, or any prospects. Let's kind of start on that.
I mean, the elephant in the room is really hoping that it does happen and that we can still have fans in the stands, given how quickly things are dominoing right now. And it's sort of a similar feel to March 2020 when, one canceled basketball game turned into a canceled society for about 6 weeks. So I really hope we're not going down that road again, and that we do get to have a World Juniors. It's always been such a pleasant part of our Christmas season experience. And it being in Canada, the games get to be, at a time that we can watch them comfortably. The Canadian team looks really exciting. one of those rare years where you get a 16-year-old that's good enough to make the team, and that level of excitement around Connor Bedard. And, I think all season he's been the guy that kind of draws your attention first, just because of what he did last year in the Regina bubble and how special that was. And his start this year hasn't been quite as exceptional on a Regina team that's, had a hard enough time that they let go of Coach Dave Struch, and John Paddock came back in to take the reins. But, he's an exceptional young man, an exceptional player, and to see him play with a forward group as deep as the one Canada has, that there was literally a player coming back from the NHL that didn't make the roster for Team Canada. That's how deep that forward group is. So I'm really excited to see how that team comes together. A unique back end, really good D-core, but all left-handed shots. And I know analytics people are telling us more and more not to worry about that. But just for me, having watched, enough left-handed shot defensemen sometimes struggle to keep the puck in, or in certain points, some guys are better at playing the offside than others. So, these coaches know the players better than I do, but it makes me a little antsy to not have any. I'm really looking forward to watching Zellweger. I think he's exceptional. I haven't really got a chance to watch much Owen Power since Buffalo took him first overall, and knowing the season he's having at Michigan, I think that whole blue is exciting to watch. The goaltending should be very good. Costa has been outstanding his whole junior career. He's the guy I think really will carry the reins and do it in Alberta where he's played. I think Canada looks really deep and really good. Another story of the tournament for me is how Russia stayed away from all their players that are North American,
right?
Or not American, but in North America, which I think is very short-sighted, but kind of a thing Russia would do, punishing guys being in their system. And I think the ones they'll punish the most is their own team, because they won't have some of their most dangerous weapons. And Russia can't afford to take away those guys like maybe Canada or the U.S. could, because of how deep those teams are. Canada doesn't have the Western Hockey League's leading scorer, Matthew Savoy, on their roster. Russia can't really afford to do that, I don't believe. And so I think they'll hurt in the tournament because of it.
Well, so one of the rumors that I'm hearing is, because they're under such pressure, political pressure, to be a dominant power, is that they're worried about a lot of their players coming to play junior, say in the CHL, places like that they're hoping that they can actually prove something, which will actually show, well, they look like they're the better players in the world. Their players in their MHL are actually much better.
Yeah, there's an element of that happens in Canada too. Like when there were players I've heard about that talked about going to play, following the Austin Matthews route and going to play some of their junior years professionally in a place like Switzerland.
Yeah.
There's rumblings that Hockey Canada has kind of poked those guys and said, well, if you go down that road, we may not be as interested in you when it comes time to picking our roster. So, there seems to be an element of that from Russia right now. Well, if you decide to go and play your junior hockey in North America, maybe we're not going to be as quick to bring you along when it comes to these international tournaments. It's a little bit of extra pressure next time one of those guys decides whether or not they're going down that road.
Yeah, no, very fair, very fair. I mean, the one caveat from earlier where you were saying is also being able to even have fans in the stands. I understand COVID can be a little rampant, but, Edmonton already missed out last year. Edmonton and Reindeer on having the tournament, and we're hoping that it can still happen this year, but I mean maybe next year again, because you want to promote the tournament and hopefully go around the world and kind of have it there. The one place I kind of want to focus on and get your insight in is on Team USA. There's been a lot of better development with USAHL hockey, and they've produced some of the craziest and best players that are coming out of the draft. Most recently, notably in the last year's draft, Seth Jarvis, as well as Trevor Zegras, these young players who are up and coming. They're strong. They had a great performance last year in the World Juniors. They ended up beating Canada. What are your thoughts on that team, and can they make a push for gold again this year?
One of the great things that the U.S. is able to do that helps them a lot at tournaments like this and others is keep their group, their cohort together. They have the National Development Program, so a lot of these guys will play together for an entire season when they're on the under-18 team. they're together a lot. They develop together. They know each other well. They have their systems in place. So it's almost second nature when they do get together for a tournament like this. And I think that helps with the instant chemistry that they have. Canada tries to replicate that some, but they just don't have nearly the same amount of time together as a group. So I think that's one of the reasons why the U.S. has had growing success. I mean, it's a deep roster. They're as deep and as good as Canada is every year at this tournament these days. And it's only going more and more in that direction as the U.S. continues to produce more players and around the country, not just in the typical hockey mad area. They're as deep and as good as Canada again this year. Maybe not as many big names, but Matthew Beniers, Sasha Pastujov, Luke, another Hughes brother, like they're going to be the American Cutters, but more skilled. And I'm really excited to see that U.S. team like every year. And it's that the Americans come at you in waves, similar to how Canada has always been. We have a roster of 4 lines that can score, 4 lines that can play a two-way game, 4 lines that can skate every year at this tournament. And the Americans have become that team too. There was a time the U.S. might have, 2 good lines, 3 good defensemen, questionable goaltending. Now they're as deep and as good and sometimes better as Canada is every year. So that's always the matchup to watch.
My only concern about the Americans this year, I agree with you. They've been coached really well. They come at waves. They seem to have deep, like you said. They don't have the star power like they don't have a Zegras this year, right? But is in goal.
Jake Sanderson too. For me, is a guy who should be in the National Hockey League, right?
Yeah.
And I could be playing top 4 minutes for the Ottawa Senators, and for whatever reason isn't. Kind of like Owen Power for Canada right now. He should be in the NHL playing for Buffalo. So when you have a D like that, he's a star, legitimate star for them on their back end. And as for the goaltending, I mean, I'm going to be frank with you. I don't really know a whole lot about the netminders for Team USA, but they just have to be, I think in a tournament like this, when you're deep like that, you're not giving up a whole ton of odd man rushes and high net front opportunities. You have to make the saves that you should make. And if you do that, then you're going to have a chance like the U.S. or a team like that to a chance to win.
Yeah. Right. So I was just going to say, because I'm always following the goalie stuff. Drew Commesso, or Commesso, you're going to be better at pronouncing those names than I am. But that's really where everyone's kind of looking at the weakness. And if you look at some of the teams, you got Askarov coming back in Russia, which this is going to be. I know he didn't perform at the last tournament. That was actually quite a surprise. You're going up against guys like Kosa and Askarov. And I that's the part that I just, even with a strong defense, you're worried that they're just going to leak goals. At least that's my feeling. That I don't think that they're going to repeat as back-to-back. I just don't think they're going to have the strength. And their guys behind him are even weaker.
And the thing about goaltending in short-term tournaments too, though, is you might think that you have a real feel for it, and then all of a sudden, guy gets hot. But Commesso had a really good season for Boston last year. He was really good for the under-18 team in 1920. This year, his save percentage is a little down, but I think Boston is not as good a team this year. And as your team goes, it's really hard for a goaltender to keep his numbers up. If Boston as a whole is struggling, then that's going to be reflected. I mean, I followed a goalie, Joel Rumpel, who played from Swift Current, went and played NCAA for Minnesota, and he had 3 years where his save percentage was above 920. His 4th year with the team, all of a sudden it plummeted to just around the 900 mark. Did he get to be an all of a sudden worse goaltender after 3 years of development? No, the team was really poor around him. And if you don't have a good year or two of recruiting coming in, then maybe is struggling a bit, and that's reflected in Commesso. We'll see as he gets to play on a team of exceptional players. And he was a 2nd-round draft pick of the Chicago Blackhawks. They saw something in him. He's a big goalie, 6'2", He's talented. I think this will be a test of whether it's the team that's struggling or it's Comesso that's struggling.
It is true. You are right, because everyone thought Askarov in that last tournament was going to be lights out, having played in the KHL. And that was probably one of his worst tournaments in his young yet, early career for him. So, hey, you brought up someone. Sorry, go ahead, John.
KHL can be an opposite example, right? How many times have we seen a goaltender come over from the KHL with a save percentage above 920, and we're thinking, boy, this guy's going to be an absolute stud. But they play a more defensive, structured hockey game over there. Koskinen for Edmonton, and I forget the goaltender's name is in the AHL for them right now. Just came over, who had a fantastic counting numbers in KHL last year. Yeah. But that's the way they play the game over there.
Yeah. Ilya Konolev. Yeah.
Yeah. So it didn't. He's got what, 870 save percentage in the.
They both struggled this year.
Yeah. So that's how often for a goaltender, it's the kinds of quality chances that you're facing on your team. And Comesso is talented enough that the Blackhawks picked him in the second round, 46th overall. They're not going to take a flyer on a whole lot of talent in. Cost is a first round pick. He's a highly touted, exceptionally accomplished goaltender. He's led Edmonton to first place in their division so far in Western Hockey League. He's got an advantage certainly on Comesso, but I don't know if it's going to be as much as we think.
Yeah, I got to watch him play a little bit a few weeks back when they faced off with Manitoba. And it was a good game. So I know a lot of people will talk about the big three, the Russia, US, Canada, and, those are always in the mix for, big stars, big names. But both Finland and Sweden are really good at developing players as well. And sometimes the best players in the NHL could come from there. And we've seen that, with some of the teams. Dallas likes to bring in their Finns or their Swedes, and so does Canes. They love their Finns. What are your expectations and thoughts on those two teams coming in, because they can always give the three big teams a hard time, and always are competing for a medal oftentimes?
I find Finland to be a real hit and miss team at the World Juniors as of late. Yeah. They can be a gold medal contender one year, and all of a sudden they can't find the net in the next tournament, and they're sitting in 6th, 7th. What they're going to be this year, I'm sorry, I don't really know. I don't know what to expect from Finland going into this tournament. I think Sweden is typically more consistent. Almost every year you're going to see Sweden in the top 4. Finland, I think, is way, way more hit and miss. But I love the Finnish style of game. Typically, it's, the more sandpaper-ish of the two Nordic countries. And the more, we see them as kind of our Nordic brothers. They play a Canadian-style game over in Finland. And there's always interesting players to watch on those groups. But I think Sweden is more your typical every-year contender. And Finland, I'm always waiting to watch them the first 2 or 3 times to see, is this going to be one of those years where they're, battling for gold or battling for relegation? Like, it seems to be one or the other with them.
So something interesting, I was reading an article that said that they have one defenseman over 6 feet, but they're very talented. And I believe his name was Topi Niemela. He was a 3rd round pick just recently of the Detroit Red Wings. He's supposed to be a premier player, but it is interesting. Like you said, it's just like they play that sandpaper game, and they got guys, 1 or 2 players that might have a name, and they just seem to appear and take on teams and win games you wouldn't expect.
Well, and that's an interesting experiment, to have only one D bigger than 6 feet, because that's kind of the way that the game has gone to some degree on the back end. There's certainly been an evolution where he is smaller D man, and still, if you're moving the puck, if you're moving your feet, if you're playing the angles, if you have a good active stick, you don't have to be 6'5", 220 pounds. But you'd like to have a bit of a mix. If you're going to have 1 or 2 of those smaller, skilled puck moving D, that's one thing, but to have a whole roster of them is something else entirely. And if I'm a coach, I'm zeroing in on that. I'm saying hammer them in the corners, get the puck to the front of the net. If I'm going up against a team that small on the back end.
Yeah, no, 100%. Now, we got to give love to Germany because their program has really developed. And I think, Draisaitl has really paved the way. I mean, Tuden Stützle has been really solid for Ottawa, even though they're struggling a little bit this year. In the Czech Republic, they're going to be there and, they're going to make an impact. What are your thoughts on some of the other teams that are partaking and where that national program for hockey is going?
I mean, we're seeing just with the emergence of Draisaitl in particular, the extra profile that's brought to hockey in Germany, and a German program that's kind of just gone on the cusp for about 20 years, where they're always just there, and every once in a while they'll give you a game or they'll have a tournament where they they stick close to the good teams, they win a couple of upsets. They're emerging, and getting a player like that makes a huge difference in terms of the profile of the sport. And when those young guys see somebody that not just makes it, but makes it on a level of being a perennial MVP candidate, one of the top 5 players in the game, and that's something you can start aiming for. The difference is that brings elite level athletes into the sport that would have normally gone another direction. You're not sort of getting people that happen to have love for hockey, or it was their second pick and it's what they were good at. Guys are making that choice to go there first, and more money is going to get started to pumped into the program. But I don't think we're going to see the results of that quite yet. The Draisaitl effect will be 5-10 years from now. But again, Germany, I find, plays typically a very good team-oriented defensive style game. They make it difficult on you, and usually, if they're going to give you trouble, it'll be evident in the first 10-15 minutes when you're kind of shaking your head going, how did we not score yet? But I don't think they have near enough offensive weapons to push back against the top end teams. It's going to be, can they hold you at bay enough to make it close late?
I can't remember the game they played last year in the juniors, but it was one of the most electric and exciting games to watch. I'm trying to pinpoint who they played, but it was a good tournament. I mean, they lost that game, but I remember it was.
I believe that was the Russian game, wasn't it?
Was it the Russian? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it was.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, yeah. So interesting enough, I mean, fans are going to have to keep their excitement to a level because, I mean, they had the trio of Stützle and Peterka and Reichel and Elias on there. Now Elias is back this year.
He had 8 points in 5 games last year.
Yeah.
So he's going to be the head of the snake, obviously, offensively for that team. But are they going to have enough offensive depth? And I think, year after year, the challenge Germany has.
The fact that they're back in there and they keep clawing their way in when they get moved out in relegation. So the only draft pick that I see is Luka Munzenberger, the Edmonton Oilers selection last year. He's the only drafted to an NHL team this year coming in. So
he's had a fairly indistinguished career. I mean, season so far in the NCAA, a couple of assists, -4 on a mediocre team. How he's playing, really, it's hard to gauge from that because he's a big, long defensive defenseman. And if I recall correct, he was a surprise pick where he was selected by the Oilers in the 3rd round. There was a little bit of head scratching when that happened. So I think a good showcase for him in the area where, he would like to one day get as a pro player in front of those fans, in front of those scouts to say, hey, I deserve that selection where I picked. He'll get a chance to play against all the other team's best players and show what kind of a shutdown D he can be.
So, hey, quick question. Just a side note, you're just talking about going to the NCAA and watching and called thousands of and hundreds and thousands or watched of junior games in the CHL. Players that go to the NCAA, they take a different development curve often. What's your take on that, on development and trying to really rate a player to be able to put him into a ranking? Because it seems like it's so different.
Well, by the time you're drafting, usually the player wouldn't have gotten to the NCAA yet, just based on
That's true.
So, what I've always found interesting about the high end player that is NCAA bound, if you're a guy who you can picture playing 3-4 years of college, then I understand the interest of playing there. The level is good. The facilities are fantastic. You've seen the right type of player really develop with the patience that they can have and the focus on fitness and the time that they're able to put into that in the NCAA. If you're a guy who's a first rounder, likely, I've often, found it to be an odd choice to play at a lower level of competition for your 16 and 17-year-old years when you're being assessed for the draft and those key development years. And I think I wonder why sometimes a guy who's going to be a first round talent goes that route rather than challenging themselves against slightly tougher competition and better coaching, probably at the Western Hockey League level. And that's not a shot at those other leagues. It's just sort of the reality of the talent there. Yet we are seeing more of that. A guy like Makar drafted out of Brooks in the Alberta Junior Hockey League and has come very quickly to the NHL, but only spent the 1 year in the NCAA. So if you're going to have 3 years, and this is a biased opinion as someone who's been very closely associated with the Western Hockey League in the 9 years I broadcasted in that league, but I loved junior A hockey when I was in Trail too. But if you're going to spend 3 years developing before you get to the next league, and only one of them is in the NCAA, which is obviously a comparable competition level to major junior, and the first two aren't, I don't really get that. I would, if I'm a player that's destined to play pro quickly, I would want to be against the best level of competition I can as quickly as I can, in my mind.
Okay, so that's interesting. So let's go back to Team Russia. So Team Russia, we were talking at the very beginning. I know when we've been talking over some of our shows, we're talking about some of these young phenoms. So at the Ivan Alinka last year, of course, we didn't just have Connor Bedard as a young man, guy that's only 5 months older, Matei Mishkov, who is scoring like crazy. We had a fabulous tournament in that tournament, went back, played a few KHL games, then they sent him down to the lower leagues to continue to develop. I'm just kind of curious. I think he's only 5'9" or something like that. But I mean, I'm looking at him to probably be their star to shine, even though he just turned 17 years old. Do you have any thoughts? Have you got to see him much?
I haven't seen him much, but I've never really concerned myself, especially in a tournament like this, when you're talking about, an explosive forward, how big are they? I mean, there's a ton of ice out there. It can get physical, but this is not a grind it to death kind of tournament. There's a lot of room for skilled players to play their game. And, a guy who this year in the MHL, like just looking at his stats in front of me here, 15 5 games for St. Petersburg, 13 points in 6 games for Morizawa. He scored 5 points in 13 games playing in the men's league for St. Petersburg at his size in a league that's really tough to score in. He's not going to have a hard time generating offense in this tournament, and likely to be a guy who'll go head to head with your Shane Wrights, your Connor Bedards, your players like that. Bedard probably not a go-to guy for Canada yet, unless maybe he will be. That could be a story, but he's going to certainly be generating offense for Russia. But again, for me, when you're leaving off some of the players they are because they're not picking the talent that are playing on North American rosters this year, I think for Russia, as opposed to the United States and Canada, who are the deeper countries, for Russia, that just leaves too much talent on the bench. and causes their depth to not match up well with those top two.
So I'll tell you what, before we go, we want to talk about draft picks before we end our show. So why don't we go back to Team Canada? We're from Canada. We're in the West. Pavel and I are right here in the Edmonton region. So by the way, guys, it's nice and cold. So welcome World Junior Tournament. We're looking forward to warming up with some games. Let's just talk about those forwards because you just mentioned about that. So I'm just going to name some of the players. We're talking they're going to be competing. So you got Connor Bedard, the young guy at 16. You got Xavier Bourgault. You got Maverick Bourque, who was already drafted. Dylan Gunther. You got Kent Johnson, Mason McTavish, Jake Neighbors, Cole Perfetti, Logan Stankoven, Shane Wright. I mean, where do you see some of these guys kind of slipping in on this lineup?
One guy to really watch, he just arrived because he had to isolate before getting there, is Kent Johnson. Just because he's not that well known in Canada yet. I mean, he's drafted by Columbus, high, but drafted by Columbus, so that doesn't get a lot of profile. He played in Trail in the BCHL, so I'm familiar with that. That was the team that I broadcast for over a decade ago and was absolutely spectacular there. He's put up great numbers at Michigan so far. Smooth skating, absolute terrific all-around offensive player. And this is an opportunity for him to showcase himself. He doesn't have the same spotlight on him, or he hasn't had that same spotlight on him with the Canadian hockey fans. So I think he's a guy who's going to open some eyes in this tournament. Stankoven playing for Kamloops at the junior level, there may not be many more dangerous players offensively than Stankoven. The questions are about whether that'll translate to the pro game or not. That I can't answer, but I can say he produces offense in a clutch way, in a consistent way for Kamloops, as well as any other player at the junior level now. So I believe he's going to be a guy, as the tournament goes along, that's going to be on the ice in the final minutes and in key situations. That roster is deep, extraordinarily deep. Ridley Gregg just got back in the lineup for Brandon after missing the start of the year and put up points at an absolutely astounding rate. Shane Wright's supposed to be the first overall draft pick this year in the NHL draft, and another one of those potential phenom types. There's all sorts of players to watch on this roster.
Wow.
Jake Neighbors has been terrific for Edmonton. McTavish was playing in the National Hockey League at the beginning of the year for Anaheim and put up some points on the power play. He's been outstanding, and an absolute rapid ascent for him. So there's not really a weak spot. All forwards on this roster right now could be first-line forwards for this team, let alone for the rest of the tournament. I think we're as deep a forward group as we've had in recent history for Canada. It's tough to crack, and so it's going to be really tough to defend. Wow.
I know, looking at it, I was like, this is probably the second or third strongest team I think they've ever iced. And if anyone's going to beat them, it's going to be themselves, I think.
Yeah. Again, as good as the Americans are every year right now, I just don't take for granted that we should be winning. I know that got mentality for Canada for a while. We started to win those 5 in a row, and then it was just, it's World Juniors, we should win. If we don't get a goal, it's disappointment. I mean, the Americans are as good as us every year now. Russia's always talented. Sweden is always talented. You never know if you're going to get one of those years where Finland is just outstanding. Canada's good. They're deep, but it's a single elimination tournament. When it gets down to it, if your goalie has a bad game or you turn over the puck at the wrong time, there's no reason why we're going to roll over everybody here. I think Canada is the favorite. I think the forward group is exceptionally deep. I think the goaltending is really strong. The home ice advantage is there, but you can't take anything for granted at World Juniors anymore. Not in a world where, the American team is as good as us every year. They're winning the Ivan Holenka most years now. They're like, this is not a 2-team tournament, but you always know at the very least they're going to push you to your absolute limit. And while Russia, I think, is going to be a little bit of a questionable team this year, maybe that makes the path a little easier. I'm not going to start, celebrating a tournament yet.
Yeah, and we had Sarah Ayers on a few weeks back, wife of David Ayers, and she talked about kind of the pressures put on some of these young players and players in the NHL and any kind of tournament. And, we want these kids just to understand, to have fun, enjoy themselves. I know it's on the big stage, but, like whether you win silver or gold, or bronze, it's still a big accomplishment. And to get to that level, to be selected is an honor. It's a big deal for whatever country you represent. And I'm sure all these kids are having the time of their life, minus the fact that it's just cold in Edmonton, so you can't really enjoy yourself.
But you look at guys like Wright and Bedard, even though they may not be the leading scorers for Canada coming into this tournament in terms of their league play, because we've seen them do it in this type of high pressure competition before. I mean, the performance they put on last season, at the U18s, and how good they were. It tells you they can perform in a tournament environment like this at a high level. When you see a guy do that, it gives you the more confidence that they're going to be able to. I mean, for the other players, absolutely lighting up the regular season, the spotlight has never been brighter on them when they know, 3-4 million people across the country are watching at home during the Christmas season, living and dying with every play they make. They don't have that kind of pressure on them on a usual basis, playing for their club team in junior hockey, where they've got their usual, base of junior fans. The pressure is on at a level it's never been, and that's why this is such a test of mettle for these players. And when you've seen guys accomplish that, that kind of accomplishment in those kinds of events before, gives you that confidence. The other guys, you're still wondering, waiting to see.
Because I had a question I was going to ask, and I think you might have answered it, Shawn. I was going to say, so if we look at, people have been talking, I'm just going to take some of the key line phrases: generational talent in Bedard, franchise player in someone like Shane Wright. But this year, looking at their numbers on their club teams, we're not seeing that level. It's good, but we're not seeing that level. Of course, we're not all following their teams really well. We don't see how good their teams are or what their structure's like. Have they got a bad defense? Are they, is something else happening? Is there sickness that's happened on some of the teams? But I think what you're saying is, if you really want to know what they play, see them when the pressure's on.
Well, yes, that's one thing. And the other thing is, you never have the level of talent around you during the regular season as you do at World Juniors. So how do they compare as a talent when surrounded by the other best? If your team is not really that deep, if you don't have the players around you, they don't elevate your game the way that the guys would. So now we're seeing them play. It's not, will they put up better numbers at the tournament than they do in the league? It's not that to me. It's when you're surrounded by guys who are at your level, how do you play? How do you lift them up? Where do the coaches decide to place you? When they see you playing with all these other guys, are they going to put you into positions where you're a go-to player? And if they do, what does that say about you, right? If the coaches look at the 13 forwards Canada has and say, we need Shane Wright on our first line with a minute to play, then that tells you a lot about Shane Wright, because they've seen them in comparison to all these other guys right in front of their face, whereas the circumstances on their team could be different. And the other thing for these guys who have been talked about to the point where, they're playing in the leagues at 50, they've had all this focus on them. Everyone's telling them they're first overall. I mean, it's a weird circumstance mentally, and then to go through COVID. There's all sorts of strange stuff happening. Developments don't happen in a straight line. But when you put them on the ice, say, here's all our best players, and the coach gets to decide, who do I want to rely on? That tells you how that talent matches up.
100%. There's that sense of trust, that you can be put in those big situations and perform under that pressure. Now, I kind of, you've watched quite a bit of juniors. I kind of wanted to get a sense of, like, similar to what happened with Owen Powers in Buffalo. Do you think it's good for young players, or even a Jake Sanderson who hasn't played yet, to go down back to the minors and play in the NCAA, or like in college, or play in the minors a little bit longer before they're brought up? Or do you think that, you can put them into the lineup and let them succeed, but maybe they're not necessarily top 6 minutes? You give them a little bit more time. Do you season them, or do you let them because this is a brief tournament, so it's hard to kind of gauge talent. I mean, it's you could capture magic in a bottle and make it work, or you can't. You were talking about Finland, but would you bring them down and let them season a little bit, or would you let them kind of adjust to the NHL and get their feet going?
It's a cop-out answer to say that it really depends on the player, but it really does. These days, there's a tendency for the NHL teams, when it comes to the higher end guys, to get them into the league faster, simply because the cap is so tight that if you can get a and that's going to make a difference and he's making entry-level money, then that could be a huge factor in the level of success your team has that year. But if you rush someone along and then stick them on the fourth line, like what's happening with Sillinger in Columbus right now, I don't know if that's the right move, because that's not the game you want that player to play. So if they could be playing in the Western League, first line minutes in every situation, leading a team out there with a minute to play, defending or trying to come back and tie a game or win a game. I think in that situation, you're likely better off being the go-to player on your junior team than being a third, fourth liner getting limited minutes, especially because it eats not just the development factor, but it eats a year of that cheap entry-level contract where they're not making the level of difference that they could be making with a little more development. But it's player to player. If I'm keeping a guy in the NHL, I want him in my top 6 or my top 4. Otherwise, I think they should be playing the bigger minutes at the lower level. And I think some teams are keeping guys without the certainty that they're going to do that yet. And I thought, for example, what happened with McTavish this year with Anaheim, I found that questionable, to have a guy in and out of the lineup at the beginning while you're waiting to see if you want to keep him. I think that stalls the season he's going to have and stalls the development track that he's going to have with his team. If you're pretty sure that he's going to go back, just send him back and let him get down there and get to work, because there's a transition period. I've seen it where guys come back from pro and they have to, shift their mindset again, and they have to, change their mentality and readjust to the speed and flow of the game at the junior level. So I think you should have your mind made up about where these guys are going to be a lot earlier than some teams have had here recently.
Yeah, wow. No, very well said. And I think looking at the draft a few years back, where you look at Pierre-Luc Dubois or even Puljujärvi, and just those two trajectories of where they went in the draft and in terms of how they developed, and even Dubois struggling in Columbus. I mean, at the beginning he was good and struggling, then moving to Winnipeg and now having a great season, whereas Puljujärvi kind of going the opposite way, and that kind of zigzag way of development. But go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, no, well, because we're talking about that and we're not going to have a lot of time left to chat, maybe could you kind of highlight, because we're talking about picks and development, so our 2022 draft, if everything goes well, it should be in June this year for the NHL. Maybe just name a few key players that, are very highlighted at the top end that you really would like us to look at. So and then just kind of give us your take on a few of those players. So obviously one that I'd like you to comment, who's being ranked number 1 and has been Shane Wright. Yeah,
when you can get a guy who's projected to be a franchise center, play in every situation, lead your team the way that, people expect Shane Wright to be able to do, the way he's shown his ability to change a game at the international level, that he's been a go-to player from the time he was 15. Those guys just don't come around a lot. And so even if this year his numbers aren't out of this world like you would want them to be, it's the full body work that you're looking at and saying, who do I think has the ceiling to be the biggest impact player? And I think we're seeing all the time in the NHL that the position you ultimately need more than any other is a first-line center. And you're not going to have success if you don't have that guy leading the way. doesn't mean that's going to be enough. I mean, you guys both know the Oilers really well. Having two of them still hasn't fully been enough for Edmonton, but I think that one position is the biggest game changer for any team when you're talking about the long-term health of the franchise. Because when you have one for 12 to 15 years. Goaltenders tend to be hit or miss and shorter term. Defenders don't seem to last as long, in my mind. So that top flight franchise is the absolute player that you need. I mean, Matt Savoy is a guy to watch. He's leading the Western Hockey League in scoring. I'm surprised he's not at the World Juniors. He was a player that had the chance to be an exceptional status player, wasn't granted it, was probably good enough to get it. Winnipeg's the best team in the Western Hockey League right now, and he's their best player.
Wow.
He's slick, he's skilled, he's got some grit. I find he doesn't get talked about enough. Geeky in Winnipeg is also really good. I mean, I know those guys a little bit better than some of the players in the other leagues, and just I've had a chance to see them and see what they have accomplished together. But is the gap between Wright and Savoy as big as some think? I'm not sure. I mean, when you're looking at what they're accomplishing, I think sometimes people kind of get their mind made up of who's the better player and who's going to make the bigger impact. And the results on the ice say that Savoy should be considered in that conversation. So he's someone I'd be really excited to get if I was a team picking in that top five.
Do you have any idea why you think Savoy wasn't even invited to the camp? I was actually rather shocked that he was left off.
I mean, Canada's really deep. We've seen that. And their team is really deep. So there may be an element of them thinking that the numbers are partly a reflection of how good the roster is around him. I don't know. I mean, there have been some questions around the Savoys for years. They didn't know whether Matt would play in the Western League. His brother is putting up great numbers in the NCAA. He's an Oilers prospect, and I don't know why Carter didn't get invited to camp either. He's leading his NCAA team in scoring and has shown a great knack for putting up points. So I'm only speculating, but it seems like they stayed away from the family, not just the one guy. So I don't know why that is, but sometimes if you're not in Hockey Canada's good books for whatever reason, it's hard to get back in.
That is interesting. You said that about Carter, because I never even thought about that. Who is literally a pure goal scorer, and
Absolutely.
he's playing against big guys already.
And you bring him in, put him on a line with Matt. That's 2/3 of an exceptional playmaker like his brother, who knows each other better than those two. I mean, that's a line Canada could have that would absolutely be successful. But when you look how deep the forward group is, who do you take off? So, but them not getting invited, I think, was odd. Other player draft that I think is interesting is someone who's fallen quite a bit, Brad Lambert, who's playing in Finland. He's playing pro hockey there, and he's Canadian by heritage, but developed as a player and lived his young life in Finland, which is a unique path. And he's really talented. He's gritty. He's a good skater, and he was projected to be among sort of the top 5 picks before his numbers kind of fell off this year. So again, talking about looking at that whole body of work, and if you really liked him and the whole process of development, and then all of a sudden playing against men this year, something has fallen off a little bit, and you have an inside track as to maybe what that might be and why.
Yeah.
Maybe instead of falling as far as he has in the rankings, maybe you're one of those teams that has a pick a little earlier, but is confident in him, and you nab him because you feel like he is that player who should have been a top 5 talent. A guy like that is really interesting to me.
That sounds like a Stevie Yzerman pick.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so one quick question before we get ready to go. I want to thank you again, Shawn, so much for your time. One thing we had talked about earlier, you were at a tournament recently maybe tell us a little bit about the tournament you're at and what you were doing there, and a little bit about what you were seeing. Because one thing we really want to promote is hockey is not just about the NHL, it's about the junior players. What we love is when people play for the love of the game, whether they make it to the big league of the NHL or not.
Yeah, I got a chance to broadcast at the Rocky Mountain Classic with a company called HN Live that does a fair bit and is doing more of this kind of thing of the different tournaments that are happening that are put on by clubs or hockey associations to provide showcases to young talent. So, this is a U15 tournament, or what used to be called Bantam, and it was many of the top U15 teams, mainly, academies and the top teams from the leagues themselves from across Western Canada. And I got a great look at the high-end players that are going to be available in the Western Hockey League's draft in May. In fact, the winners from NAX, they won the tournament and they were absolutely dominant in the tournament. And I'm getting a chance to go and broadcast at the NAX's tournament that they're putting on in January in Edmonton. So you guys should check that out. That's going to be a lot of really good young talent there too. And a guy I got to watch was Cole Reshney, who's actually a Saskatchewan product from a small town just on the Alberta border. And he scored a hat trick in the gold medal game. Right now, in 12 league games for NAX in the CSSHL, Reshney has 45 points. So, yeah, he's one of those guys close to the top of the Western Hockey League draft, assuming he's looking to go that route. But those tournaments are really fun to get to see the future. The lobby was packed with scouts from the Western Hockey League, from the Junior A leagues, college scouts, things of that nature. You see all these guys that are going to be big factors on their team in the future, leading their teams now, because you don't always get to be that first line player when you make the move to the next level. Right now, they're carrying their teams. What are they like as leaders? What are they like when they're the head of the snake? And so it's watch them develop that way, and then see, who's going to make the transition, and watch which guys get nabbed close to the top of the draft. So the academies certainly were dominant in that event, and it's been the trend, where more of the top end players are going to all these academy programs in the CSSHL. Calgary Bison still put on a pretty good show, a bit of an upset, but whenever you go to events like these, showcases like this, it seems to be the academies that are the teams to watch. And another fun thing that happened at that event still shows you the draw of Jerome McGinley in Calgary. He was coaching for Rink Academy Kelowna, and they put his team up against the Calgary Canucks on a Friday night at the main rink and the facility there that Hockey Canada plays in, and drew a huge crowd just to watch Jerome McGinley coach. The next day, he often got inducted into the Hall of Fame. But that's how big McGinley still is in Calgary, that just to watch him coach 14 and 13-year-olds got a huge crowd.
Yeah. And I believe his son just got recently drafted, something young. He's 13 or 14, so we're going to have to find that out. But I know he just recently got drafted as well.
I actually heard something about that. Yeah, it is amazing. Again, it just goes to see why everyone dreams of one day playing in the NHL, right? I mean, just
he got signed by Seattle.
Okay.
I think it's Tidge. How's it's pronounced? He got signed by Seattle. He is not in the age group that the tournament was, but he's a 15-year-old this year, so he's playing U18. But really good young player.
Wow.
I wonder where he got his talents from.
Mom.
You got him from mom. I'm sure Jerome would agree with you. So, well, thanks again. If maybe if you can send us along the links, possibly to that tournament, of how to connect if anyone wants to listen in, or connect us up. Is that possible, Shawn?
Yeah, it's hnlive.ca.
Okay.
Yep. So that we're broadcasting. I think it's the 13th to the 15th is the event for NAX, and if you're in the Edmonton area, you can come check it out. I mean, fingers crossed. Anyway.
Well, who knows? That's a whole other story. COVID protocols in all the areas, and we'll see. Hopefully, the World Junior Tournament can still continue and take off from there. So, again, thank you so much. Any last thoughts to my co-host here?
No, Shawn, it's been a treat and pleasure. We hope you get a promotion at work, because most people who come on here do. And I think for every guest we get, Evan gets a hair on his face, so it's closer to getting a beard. So that's a positive.
Like an angel getting his wings. Evan gets a hair on his face. So
Exactly.
Chris, maybe a Christmas miracle will actually have a beard one of these days. But
Right.
you guys follow Edmonton pretty close. Nice to see a couple of wins after that struggle of 6 games. So fingers crossed we get some NHL hockey and that they get going back again.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, on behalf of Two Guys in Hockey Talk, in the meantime and between time,
Keep your sticks on the ice.
cheers, guys.
Everyone.